I love you so much, sweetheart. Even in your disabilities, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I love you, baby." This was the exact words the black maid whispered to the disabled child. The Korean Mafia boss installed 32 hidden cameras to monitor his paralyzed daughter. But he wasn't prepared for the secret life the black maid led in the quiet hours when she thought the house was asleep. Kim Jae stood in the darkness of his high-tech command center at 2:00 a.m., his tattooed chest rising and falling in the blue glow of 24 screens. His finger trembled slightly as it hovered over the live feed of the nursery, a cold dread pooling in his stomach that no amount of Street One power could suppress. That morning, the technicians had finished weaving a web of invisible lenses into the moldings and light fixtures, completing a digital fortress designed to ensure Subin was never truly alone. Jai told himself this was an act of love, that a father who had seen the worst of the soul underworld was simply being thorough in a world that had already stolen his daughter's ability to walk. But as he stared at the grid of unblinking eyes, the silence of the mansion felt less like safety and more like a tomb. He had built a sanctuary out of glass and steel, yet the heavy weight of the surveillance tablet in his hand suggested he hadn't created a home at all, but a high-definition prison for the only person he had left to love. Just as he was about to look away, a flicker of movement on screen 4 caught his eye. Clara was kneeling on the rug, and for the first time in 2 years, the camera captured something Kim Jae thought was gone forever. Sometimes love comes in ways and forms we do not expect. What would you do if you found out that the least person you expected to love your child is the person that can take a bullet for the same child? This is not the regular story, but one with deep roots on how love can melt a hardened heart. Before we dive deep into the story, where are you watching? Mention your city in the comments so I can specially send regards to you. And also click on the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel. Now sit tight, let's dive into the story. The arrival of the 13th candidate did not begin with the usual subservient knock or the polished clicking of professional heels on the cold marble of the foyer. Instead, it began with a sound Kim Jae hadn't heard within these walls since the accident. The rhythmic, unabashed humming of a soulful melody that seemed to challenge the very silence of the mansion. Jai stood at the top of the grand staircase, his white shirt unbuttoned, the ink of a dragon's tail peeking out from his collarbone. He watched as the heavy oak doors swung open to reveal Clara. She didn't look like the specialists who had come before her. Those women had arrived in starch-stiffened scrubs, smelling of antiseptic and suppressed fear, looking at the mansion as if it were a high-security lab, and at Subin as if she were a delicate piece of glass already shattered. Clara stood in the center of the entryway, a single worn suitcase at her side. She was dressed in soft, cotton blue and white striped pajamas, or perhaps they were loungewear, that looked entirely too comfortable for a house governed by ironclad rules. The stripes were bold and bright, clashing beautifully with the somber, darkwood paneling of the hall. "Mr. Kim," she called out, her voice echoing upward. She didn't wait for him to descend. She shielded her eyes from the glare of the massive chandelier, looking up at him with a gaze that was neither intimidated nor defiant. It was simply observant. Jai descended the stairs slowly, his presence a physical weight in the room. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, maintaining his height advantage. "You were sent the employee handbook, Ms. Clara. Page 4 clearly dictates the uniform. Clinical white. Sanitize ready. You look like you're prepared for a Sunday morning in bed, not a shift in a medical recovery suite." Clara didn't flinch. She smoothed the fabric of her striped sleeve, her expression softening into a small, knowing smile. "I read the handbook, Mr. Kim. I also read the room. This isn't a hospital, though you've certainly spent enough money trying to make it feel like one. And Subin isn't a patient. She's a little girl." "She is a child with specific, high-level needs," Jai countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Needs that require professional boundaries. The white uniform represents authority and cleanliness." "The white uniform represents fear," Clara corrected him gently. She took a step closer to the stairs, invading the personal space he usually used to terrify his subordinates. To a child who has spent half her life in clinics, white is the color of needles, of cold hands, and of people who talk about her in the third person while she's sitting right there. I chose these stripes because they look like the sky, because they move when I move. I'm here to brighten the room, not to disappear into the wallpaper. Jai felt a surge of irritation, but beneath it, a flicker of something he couldn't name. He thought of the 12 women who had worn the white scrubs. They had followed every rule, logged every milliliter of fluid, and yet Subin's eyes had remained vacant, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for a storm that never ended. "I have cameras in every room, Clara," he warned, leaning forward. "I see everything. If your brightening of the room interferes with her physical therapy, or if you think your comfort comes before her safety, you will be out of these doors before the sun sets." "Good," Clara said, reaching down to pick up her suitcase. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it reached her eyes, which were filled with a profound, steady strength. "I hope you do watch, because if you're looking through those screens, it means you're actually looking at your daughter. That's a start." She didn't wait for his permission to proceed. She asked the hovering butler for the way to the nursery and began to walk, the blue and white stripes of her clothes flickering like a beacon against the shadows of the long, silent corridor. Jai stayed on the stairs, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. He watched her go, then turned toward his study. He needed to see this. He needed to see the moment this woman in the striped clothes realized that the silence in Subin's room was a vacuum that sucked the life out of everyone who entered. He sat before his monitors, the blue light reflecting off his tattoos, and waited for the cameras to show him the failure he was certain was coming. But as Clara entered the nursery and the screen flickered to life, he saw her do something no one else had ever done. She didn't check the vitals monitor. She didn't straighten the bedsheets. She simply sat on the rug, crossed her legs, and began to unpack a set of colorful blocks, the blue and white stripes of her outfit creating a vibrant contrast against the sterile gray of the room. "Hi, Subin," she whispered, her voice carrying through the high-definition speakers. "I'm Clara. I like your dress. Do you want to help me build a tower?" In the command center, Jai held his breath, his eyes locked on his daughter's pale, unmoving face, waiting for the rejection he was so used to seeing. The blue light of the monitors was the only thing that kept the darkness of the study at bay, casting long, skeletal shadows across the mahogany desk. It was 2:00 a.m., the hour when the rest of Seoul was a blur of neon and sleep, but Kim Jai remained a ghost in his own machine. He leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on screen 4. The nursery was bathed in the soft, amber glow of a nightlight, creating a pocket of warmth that felt alien to the rest of the cold, silent mansion. Clara was there, still draped in those defiant blue and white stripes. She wasn't in a chair or standing at a professional distance. She was sitting directly on the thick rug, her legs tucked under her, creating a small circle of intimacy with Subin. Between them lay a scattered array of colorful wooden blocks, bright reds, yellows, and deep blues that looked like gems against the muted carpet. Jai watched, his breath hitching, as Clara picked up a yellow block and tapped it twice against the floor. Tap, tap. Then she paused, looking at Subin with an expression of intense, patient focus. She repeated the motion, adding a third beat. Tap, tap, tap. It was a simple rhythm, a heartbeat in the silence. "Your turn, little bird." Clara's voice drifted through the high-fidelity speakers, low and melodic. For a long minute, Subin didn't move. She sat in her pink dress, her small hands resting limply in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blocks as if they were a puzzle she couldn't solve. Jai felt the familiar, crushing weight of disappointment. He had seen this 1,000 times with the other nurses. The attempts at engagement met with the impenetrable wall of his daughter's withdrawal. He reached for the dial to switch the feed, unable to watch another moment of the silence that haunted him. Then Subin's hand moved. It was a slow, jerky motion, as if she were fighting through invisible water. Her fingers closed around a red block. With an effort that made her small brow furrow, she lifted it and let it fall against the floor. Clack. Jai froze, his hand hovering over the controls. Clara didn't cheer or rush to embrace her. She simply smiled, a wide, radiant expression that seemed to illuminate the room. She imitated the single beat with her own block. Clack. Then she did the rhythm again. Tap, tap, tap. Subin watched Clara's hands, her eyes wide. She tried again. Clack, clack. Then, after a breathless pause, she found the third beat. Clack. A soft, bubbling sound erupted from the speakers. It was small, fragile, and slightly rusty from disuse, but it was unmistakable. It was a giggle. It grew, turning into a genuine melodic laugh that filled the nursery and echoed through Jai's silent study. Jai stood up so abruptly his chair hit the wall. He pressed his palms against the cold glass of the monitor, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was seeing her, truly seeing her. The daughter who had been a statue for 2 years was vibrating with life, her face transformed by a joy that his millions could never buy. "There she is," Clara whispered on the screen, her own eyes glistening. "There's that music." Jai sank back into his seat, his vision blurring. For the first time, the cameras didn't feel like a security measure. They felt like a window into a miracle he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. As the laughter faded into a comfortable silence, he realized the stripes on Clara's clothes weren't just a choice. They were a bridge, and his daughter was finally crossing it. The euphoria of the night before lingered in the air like a phantom scent, but for Kim Jai, it was quickly replaced by the cold, analytical reflex that had kept him alive in the Seoul underworld. A mafia boss did not survive on miracles alone. He survived on information. While the house slept, Jai sat in the dim light of his office, the laughter of his daughter still echoing in his mind, clashing with the professional suspicion that governed his soul. He pulled up Clara's digital file, the one his security team had vetted weeks ago. On the surface, it was impeccable, nursing degrees, glowing references, a clean record. But Jai began to dig deeper, bypassing the official resumes and diving into the raw data of the city's archives. He cross-referenced her maiden name, Adler, with the shipping manifests and police reports from 3 years prior. His fingers froze over the keyboard as a specific geographic coordinate blinked on the screen: District 9. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. District 9 had been a chaotic sprawl of international shipping containers and low-income housing that stood in the way of his gateway to the East Development Project. When the local unions refused to move, Jai had authorized a cleansing operation. It was supposed to be a scare tactic, a midnight raid to dismantle the hubs, but his enforcers had been overzealous. A fire had broken out, and a structural collapse in a nearby warehouse had turned a routine intimidation into a tragedy. Jai scrolled through the list of casualties from that night. His eyes locked onto a name: Marcus Adler. The report was clinical. Marcus had been a young dock worker, a promising student who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had survived the collapse, but the damage to his spine was absolute. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Jai leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking in the silence. He felt a sudden, sharp chill. He opened a secondary file, a private investigator's report he'd commissioned on the survivors to ensure no lawsuits would stick. There, tucked away in the digital shadows, was a photograph of a younger Clara standing outside a rehabilitation center, her face etched with a grief so profound it mirrored the look Jai saw in the mirror every morning. She wasn't just a nurse. She was the sister of a man whose life he had destroyed for the sake of a real estate margin. He looked back at the monitor displaying the nursery. Clara was now asleep in the armchair beside Subin's bed, her head tilted back, still wearing those blue and white stripes. To anyone else, she looked like a dedicated caregiver. To Jai, she now looked like a Trojan horse. The coincidence was too perfect, too jagged to be ignored. Had she sought him out? Was the laughter he'd heard an hour ago part of a long con, a way to gain his trust before striking at the heart of the man who had crippled her brother? Or was it something more terrifying, that the only person capable of saving his daughter was the one person who had every right to kill him? Jai watched her chest rise and fall through the grainy infrared lens. The digital eyes he had installed to protect his daughter had finally done their job, but the truth they revealed was a weapon he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He reached into his desk drawer, his fingers brushing the cold steel of his handgun, his gaze never leaving the woman who brought music into a house built on blood and silence. The following night, the air in the command center felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and the silent accusations of the files sitting on Jai's desk. He watched the screen, his gaze fixed on Clara with a new, jagged intensity. He looked for a slip in her mask, a sign of the vengeance he was certain must be simmering beneath her skin. Subin was asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful, but Clara remained awake. She was sitting on the edge of the rug, her back to the child's bed, staring directly into the lens of the hidden camera tucked behind the crown molding. She didn't look surprised or accidental. She looked as though she were staring into Jai's very soul. "I know you're there," she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, steady vibration that cut through the low hum of the cooling fans in the study. Jai froze, his cigar smoldering forgotten in the ashtray. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, yet she addressed the unblinking glass eye with the confidence of a woman standing face to face with him. "You think these lenses protect her," Clara continued, her eyes locked on the camera. "You think that by cataloging every breath she takes, you're fulfilling your duty, but you're not protecting her, Kim Jai, you're hiding." Jai felt a surge of cold fury. No one in Seoul spoke his name without a title, and certainly no one questioned his methods within his own walls. He reached for the intercom to dismiss her, to end this charade, but her next words stayed his hand. "You're a coward," she said softly, the blue and white stripes of her shirt shimmering in the dim light. "A coward hiding behind reinforced glass and digital sensors. You watch her laugh through a speaker because you're too afraid to hear it in person and realize you don't know how to respond. You'd rather be a ghost in the wiring than a father in the room." She stood up, walking toward the camera until her face filled the monitor, her expression one of profound, stinging pity. "You spent a fortune to make sure you never miss a moment, yet you've missed every single one because you aren't here. You see the tragedy of her legs, but you're blind to the miracle of her spirit." The silence that followed was deafening. Jai stared at the screen, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He wanted to see a predator, a woman seeking blood for District 9, but all he saw was a mirror. She wasn't just calling out a mafia boss, she was calling out a man who had used his power to build a wall between himself and the only thing that could actually break him. "She doesn't need a guard," Clara whispered, her breath fogging the lens for a brief second. "She needs you, but I suppose it's easier to be a god of the monitors than a man who has to ask for forgiveness." She turned away then, returning to her seat by the bed as if she hadn't just dismantled the Emperor's entire philosophy. In the study, Jai sat in the dark, the flickering blue light of the screens feeling suddenly like a cold, shallow grave. He looked at his hands that had built an empire and ordered cleansings, and realized they were shaking. For the first time, the cameras hadn't shown him a secret about Clara, they had shown him the truth about himself. The following morning, the atmosphere in the mansion didn't just feel heavy, it felt lethal. Jai was at his desk, the taste of stale coffee and bitter realization coating his tongue, when his encrypted phone vibrated with a priority alert. It wasn't a surveillance notification from the nursery. It was a message from the Viper Syndicate, his primary rivals in the city's concrete jungle. The attachment was a single, high-resolution photograph. It showed Clara standing on a rain-slicked street corner 2 days before she had applied for the job. She was speaking to a man Jai recognized, a low-level street soldier who specialized in gathering intelligence for the syndicate. In the photo, Clara's face was obscured by a hood, but the blue and white striped bag she carried was unmistakable. The text beneath the image was short. "The Viper knows who sleeps in your house, Jai. Your new nurse isn't there for the child. She's a ghost from District 9, sent to finish what the fire started. Handle your trash or we will." Jai felt the world tilt. The syndicate didn't care about the truth of Clara's grief. They only saw a tactical opening. To them, she was a perfect plant, a woman with a motive for vengeance who had successfully infiltrated the inner sanctum of their greatest enemy. If Jai didn't act, his own organization would see him as weak, compromised by a woman. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the garden where Clara was pushing Subin's wheelchair. From this height, the blue and white stripes of Clara's shirt were a bright, defiant target against the green grass. He watched as she stopped to pick a flower, handing it to Subin with a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. His hand moved to the drawer where his silenced pistol lay. The protocol was simple. In the world of the Mafia, suspicion was a death sentence. To protect the Empire, to protect the very child Clara was currently making laugh, he should have his men take her to the basement. He should eliminate the variable before the syndicate could use her to trigger a war. But then he looked back at the monitors. He saw the way Subin's eyes followed Clara, the way the girl's posture had changed from a slumped, defeated weight to something reaching, something alive. If Clara was an assassin, she was the most patient and cruel one he had ever encountered, killing him not with a bullet, but by giving him a glimpse of the heaven he had spent a lifetime forfeiting. He had to decide. Was she a weapon forged in the fires of District 9, or was she the only soul brave enough to walk through his gates and demand he be a man? The syndicate's threat was a shadow at the door, but the light Clara had brought into the nursery was a reality he couldn't bring himself to extinguish. "Call the security team," Jai said into his intercom, his voice cracking slightly before regaining its iron edge. "Yes, sir. Shall we prepare the holding room?" Jai watched Clara on the screen. She was kneeling now, level with Subin, adjusting the girl's pink dress. "No," Jai replied, his eyes narrowing as he made a choice that would likely seal his fate. "Prepare a perimeter, and tell them if anyone approaches this house, they are to be met with lethal force. Clara stays." The mansion felt like a tomb of marble and silence as Jai finally stepped out of his command center. It was the dead of night, that hollow hour when secrets breathe more loudly than people. He moved through the corridors like a ghost, his unbuttoned white shirt fluttering against his tattooed skin, until he reached the heavy double doors of the nursery. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't reach for the tablet to check the feed. He simply pushed the door open. The air inside was different. It smelled of lavender and soft cotton, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the rest of the house. In the corner, the amber glow of the nightlight caught the steady rise and fall of Clara's shoulders. She was asleep in the armchair, her head tilted to the side, still dressed in the blue and white stripes that had become the only color in Jai's gray world. Near her hand, resting on the side table, was a small, tarnished silver locket and a thin, worn folder she must have been reading before sleep took her. Jai approached with the silent, predatory grace of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted. He picked up the locket first. It was dented, the hinge strained. Inside was a photo of a young man with a bright, easy smile, Marcus. Beside it was a tiny, handwritten scrap of paper that simply read, "For the truth." His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened the folder. These weren't just medical records. They were a chronicle of a life interrupted. He saw the surgical notes from the night of the District 9 fire, the mounting debt of a rehabilitation center that Clara had been paying off in increments that must have cost her every cent she earned. But tucked into the back was something that made Jai's blood run cold. A newspaper clipping of himself, his face circled in red ink, dated the day the development project had been approved. He looked from the papers to the sleeping woman. He had expected to find evidence of a ransom plot or a syndicate contact list. Instead, he found the weight of his own shadow. She wasn't here for a payout. The Viper was wrong about her being an assassin, and Jai had been wrong about her being a nurse. She was a seeker. She had come into the house of the monster to understand how a man could order a fire that ended one life, yet spend millions to preserve another. She wasn't looking for his money. She was looking for his soul. She wanted to know if the man who had crippled her brother was capable of love, or if he was merely a machine of glass and steel. Jai looked over at Subin, who was sleeping peacefully, her small hand clutching one of the colorful blocks Clara had introduced. The realization hit him with a physical ache. Clara had every reason to hate him, every reason to let his daughter wither in the silence she had found her in. Yet, she had chosen to heal the child of her enemy. She had poured her warmth into the very bloodline that had brought her family to ruin. He gently set the locket back on the table, his fingers lingering near hers for a fraction of a second. He felt a profound sense of shame, a feeling more agonizing than any wound he had ever received in the streets. He had spent years watching her through a lens, thinking he was the one in control, the one with the power. But as he stood in the quiet of the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of her sacrifice and his own cruelty, he realized that he was the one who was truly paralyzed. He had been waiting for a why to explain her presence, fearing a hidden weapon. Now he knew her only weapon was the truth of what he had done, and her only motive was a grace he didn't deserve. He backed away toward the door, his gaze never leaving the blue and white stripes of her shirt. He had to protect her, not because she was a witness or a liability, but because she was the only thing in his world that wasn't for sale. As he closed the door, the click of the latch sounded like the beginning of a war he was finally ready to fight. The stillness of the mansion was shattered not by a sound, but by the sudden, violent shift in the house's electricity. The monitors in the study flickered and died as the secondary security team, men Jai had paid to be loyal only to the firm's bottom line, executed a silent override. Jai didn't need the screens to know what was happening. The Viper Syndicate's threat had reached the ears of his lieutenants, and in the cold logic of the Mafia, a compromised boss was a dead boss. They weren't coming for him yet. They were coming to clean the house of the liability. Jai raced down the darkened corridor, his heart hammering against the ink of the dragon on his chest. He reached the nursery just as the heavy doors were kicked open by two men in tactical gear. These were his own soldiers, men he had trained to be efficient, emotionless, and absolute. In the dim amber light of the nightlight, Clara stood in front of Subin's bed, her blue and white stripes a sharp contrast to the black steel of the rifles leveled at her chest. "Move aside, nurse," the lead soldier growled, his voice muffled by a balaclava. "The syndicate has flagged you. Orders are to neutralize the threat." "She isn't a threat." Jai's voice roared through the room as he stepped from the shadows. The soldiers didn't lower their weapons. They hesitated, their eyes darting between their boss and the woman. "Sir, the board has voted. She's a District 9 plant. We can't risk the leak. Step away so we can finish this." Jai didn't step away. Instead, he moved with a deliberate, terrifying slowness until he was standing directly in front of Clara. He ripped his white shirt open, the buttons scattering across the rug like plastic teeth. In the faint light, the full extent of his tattoos was revealed. The writhing dragons, the jagged scars of 100 street wars, the map of a violent life etched into his skin. He looked like the monster the world believed him to be. A creature of the dark standing guard over a light he didn't deserve. "You speak of orders." Jai's voice was a low, vibrating snarl that seemed to shake the very walls. "I am the order. I am the one who built this empire from blood and ash, and I am the one who decides who lives in this house." "Sir, you're compromised." "I am awake." Jai stepped forward, the barrel of the lead rifle pressing into the center of his tattooed chest. He didn't flinch. "You see this woman, you see these stripes? She has done more for my daughter in a week than all of you have done for me in a decade. She stays, and if you want to clean this room, you start with me." Behind him, he could hear Clara's sharp intake of breath. He felt the heat of her presence, the smallness of Subin cowering in the bed, and for the first time in his life, the tattoos on his body didn't feel like armor. They felt like a confession. The soldiers stood frozen, the tension in the room coiled like a wire about to snap. They looked at the man they had feared for years, standing half-naked and unarmed, shielding a woman who should have been his enemy. It was a lapse in their programming. In that moment of hesitation, Jai saw the shift in their eyes, the realization that the god of the monitors had finally come down to earth. "Lower the weapons," Jai commanded, his voice no longer a roar but a cold, absolute decree. "Or find out if I'm as fast as the stories say." Slowly, agonizingly, the rifles descended. The soldiers backed toward the door, their silence a mixture of confusion and lingering dread. As they disappeared into the hallway, Jai didn't move. He stood there, his chest heaving, his ink-stained skin glistening with sweat. He was a mafia boss who had just declared war on his own men to protect a woman who had come to his house to find a reason to hate him. He didn't turn around to face Clara. He couldn't. Not yet. Not while the monster on his skin was still so visible. The silence that followed the soldiers' departure was more deafening than the roar of their weapons. Jai remained standing in the center of the nursery, his chest heaving, his shirt hanging open like a discarded skin. The ink of the dragon seemed to pulse in the low light, a permanent reminder of the violence he had cultivated. He didn't turn to face Clara immediately. Instead, he looked up at the corner of the ceiling where the red pinprick of a hidden lens stared back at him. With a sudden, guttural growl, Jai grabbed the heavy wooden chair from beside the nursing station. He swung it with a desperate, raw strength, the legs of the chair shattering the crown molding. The camera didn't just break, it exploded in a spray of glass and plastic. He didn't stop there. He moved through the room with a focused, manic energy, tearing into the high-tech sanctuary he had built. Clara watched from the bedside, her hand resting protectively on Subin's shoulder. She saw the man she had called a coward finally stripping away his armor. Jai reached into the light fixtures, his fingers bleeding as he ripped out the delicate wiring. He pulled the sensors from the door frames, his breath coming in ragged hitches. He wasn't just destroying equipment, he was dismantling the wall he had built between his heart and his history. "I watched you," he rasped, his voice cracking as he tore a camera from behind a decorative mirror. He turned to face her then, the shattered remains of a lens clutched in his hand. His white shirt was stained with dust and a drop of his own blood, the tattoos on his chest fully exposed to the air. "I sat in that dark room and watched you heal her because I was too broken to do it myself. I used these eyes to steal the moments I was too afraid to earn." He walked toward the bedside, his boots crunching on the glass of his own surveillance state. He stopped a few feet from her, his posture no longer that of a boss or a predator, but of a man standing in the wreckage of his own making. The open shirt, revealing the map of his sins in ink and scar tissue, was his final surrender. He had nothing left to hide, not his guilt over District 9, not his fear of the syndicate, and certainly not the soul that Clara had forced back into the light. "The cameras are gone, Clara," he said, the glass falling from his hand to the rug. "There is no one watching anymore, no god of the monitors, just me." He looked down at Subin, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. For the first time, Jai didn't look at her through a screen or a filter of pity. He looked at her and saw the life he had almost let slip away. He looked back at Clara, acknowledging the locket he had found, the brother he had crippled, and the debt that no amount of money could ever settle. Clara stood up slowly, her blue and white stripes a calm harbor in the middle of his storm. She didn't move away from the man with the tattooed chest and the bloodied hands. Instead, she took a step toward him, crossing the final boundary. She reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of his open collar, not in a gesture of affection, but of recognition. "The cameras were the easy part to tear down, Kim Jai," she whispered, her voice steady and soft. "Now you have to live in the house you've built." Jai nodded, a single, sharp movement. He felt the weight of the mansion pressing in on him, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a foundation. He stood there in the ruins of his surveillance, exposed and vulnerable, finally ready to stop watching his life and start living it. The war with the syndicate was coming, and his empire was fractured. But as he stood in the nursery with the two people who mattered, he realized he had never felt more powerful than he did in this moment of total defeat. The weeks that followed the dismantling of the mansion's digital eyes were filled with a strange, quiet sunlight. The war with the syndicate hadn't vanished, but the battle within the walls of the Kim estate had been won. The sterile silence was gone, replaced by the soft, persistent melodies of Clara's humming and the rhythmic clicking of wooden blocks. In the center of the vast, beautiful sitting room, the heavy velvet curtains were thrown wide, letting the morning sun spill across the cream-colored rug. A small wheelchair stood empty near the sofa, no longer a centerpiece of tragedy, but merely a tool waiting to be used. Kim Jai sat on the floor, his posture relaxed, the tattoos on his forearms visible as he rolled up the sleeves of a plain cotton shirt. There was no desk between him and the world, no monitor to filter the reality of his daughter's existence. Clara knelt opposite him, her blue and white striped pajamas a bright beacon of the new order she had established. Between them sat Subin, dressed in her favorite pink dress and black tights, her small face glowing with a concentration that was no longer painful to witness. Clara reached out, placing a bright yellow block halfway between the child and her father. "Go on, Subin," she encouraged softly. "Show him the tower we're building." Jai watched, his heart doing a slow, heavy roll in his chest. He saw his daughter's hand reach out, no longer with the hesitant, jerky movements of the past, but with a burgeoning confidence. She grasped the block, but instead of stacking it, she paused. Her dark eyes, so like Jai's but filled with a light he had only recently discovered, looked up at him. She didn't reach for the second block. Instead, she let the yellow wood drop and reached her small, soft hand toward her father. Jai felt a lump form in his throat that no amount of Mafia stoicism could suppress. He extended his hand, his large, scarred palm trembling as her tiny fingers curled around his thumb. It was the first time she had initiated contact since the night of the accident. The connection was electric, grounded in a truth that cameras could never capture. In that moment, the feared underworld figure, the man who had ordered cleansings and built fortresses of glass, vanished entirely. The Mafia boss was a ghost of a violent past. In the center of the sun-drenched room, there was only a father, humbled by the grace of a woman he had once seen as a threat. "She's been waiting for you to be here, Kim Jai," Clara said, her voice a warm anchor in the room. "Not watching, just here." Jai squeezed his daughter's hand gently, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. He looked at Clara, the woman in stripes who had walked into his house of shadows and demanded the light. He thought of the reparations he had already begun to make for Marcus, the secret accounts he was dismantling, and the legitimate path he was now carving through the rubble of his old life. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Subin's. The silence of the house was finally broken, not by the static of a surveillance feed, but by the sound of a family breathing in unison. The first step hadn't been a physical one for Subin's legs. It was the giant leap Jai had taken away from his monitors and back into the arms of his child. For the first time in his life, Kim Jai wasn't looking for an exit or a hidden camera. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The end. If you love this story, kindly subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more interesting stories.